Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this Thinking Strategically About Sustainability Programs on Your Dairy webinar. My name is Catherine Garcia, and I will be the moderator for the webinar. In 1959, AgSource was formed to serve Wisconsin dairy farmers. What began as a regional dairy records processing cooperative has now grown into the AgSource of today, serving industries that span the entire agricultural ecosystem. From cutting-edge soil, plant tissue, and water testing to agronomic consulting and full-service DHI testing, AgSource at its core is a source of truth. One test at a time, we help our clients make the best decisions, always grounded in data. I am excited to introduce our presenters for today, Patrick Wood and Kate Chamberlain. Patrick is the founder of Ag Methane Advisors, a niche consulting firm that helps livestock producers reap the benefits of reducing greenhouse gas emissions. For the last 14 years, his primary focus has been on various environmental commodities available to dairy biogas producers. Patrick has a background in production agriculture and a master's degree in applied ecological economics from University of Vermont. His role at Ag Methane is focused on overseeing the company's direction and operations, managing client relationships, and developing new opportunities for Ag Methane and its clients. Outside of work, he enjoys spending time with his family, skiing, biking, hiking, swimming, and generally being outside as much as possible. Kate is currently a business analyst at AgSource, where she focuses on exploring sustainability opportunities, building partnerships, and supporting AgSource members. Kate has spent her entire career in the cattle industry with an educational background in both animal science and business. In her free time, Kate and her family graze a herd of Angus cattle and try to hit the trails with their horses as often as possible. We're excited to have both of our presenters with us today.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's really nice to be here with you today. My name is Patrick Wood, and I am going to be presenting on the general subject of thinking strategically about GHG on your dairy, but specifically about how to create carbon credits. So I'm going to share my screen here and start this presentation. Bear with me a moment, and we will forge ahead. So my company, Ag Methane Advisors, is a niche consulting firm. We help dairies get paid to create carbon credits. We think that dairies can contribute substantially to mitigating climate change, but they need to get paid to do so. So they need a financial incentive, and we help provide that. Our primary domain is anaerobic digestion, and I've been working with dairies and digesters and carbon markets since 2007. But we're also deeply involved in other domains. So that's enteric methane, methane that cows burp or exhale, and alternative manure management projects. So projects that divert manure from anaerobic storage, like a lagoon or a pit, create methane reductions, and then also projects that reduce nitrous oxide emissions by managing nitrogen in cropping, and projects that store carbon dioxide in soils, so it's not in the atmosphere. Today, we are going to be talking about carbon markets at a high level, applicable to all of those domains. So in general, always recommend to farms to think about entering carbon markets like any new or value-added business, of which most areas are very familiar. So these basic questions are, I assume, are not new to most folks, but figure out your goals, likely to be interested in diversifying, increasing revenue, figuring out if you have time, capacity, interest, or if people on your team do, figure out how spending time on this new activity will impact your current operations and business. Obviously, what's it going to cost? What do you stand to make? And is it worth the opportunity cost? And is it worth the risks? So pretty basic business planning approach to start there. Also, I think it's important to, a lot of people come to me and say, you know, how do I participate in carbon markets? And that's a lot like saying, these days, it's a lot like saying, How do I participate in financial markets? There's all kinds of markets. People trade in futures. People trade in financial market stocks. There's mutual funds, of course, all different segments of financial markets. And in the same way with carbon markets, there are many different segments of carbon markets. So we're going to talk through some of those relevant to dairies. So the two main segments are the voluntary market and the compliance market. So voluntary markets are where corporations, typically, could also be individuals, sometimes universities, or other organizations like that, choose to reduce emissions. They're often doing that to meet their net zero goals. So a net zero goal would be saying by 2045, the operations of our company are going to be net zero. So our emissions are not going to exceed the amount of sequestration or storage or carbon removal. So Nestle is an example of a company who has one of these net zero commitments. It's relevant to the dairy industry. And there are others. Yeah, there's certainly others. In some cases, these companies are also producing credits. So Barry Callebaut is an example of a chocolate company that depends upon a lot of milk. And they work with some of their farms in their supply chain to produce emissions reductions. And Barry Callebaut helps the farms do it. And Barry Callebaut gets to claim the emissions reductions, and the farms get compensated. So in a different primary segment of the carbon market is called compliance markets. And this is most relevant to a lot of the digester projects you probably heard about. So there are different regulations, like California has a cap and trade regulation and a low carbon fuel standard that farms all over the country can participate in. And under these programs, regulated entities like oil refineries, big utilities, blenders and refiners of fossil fuels are required to either purchase credits or purchase a certain portion of their fuel mix from renewable or low carbon or clean fuel suppliers. And the goal of these programs is to reduce emissions from the entire, well, the majority of the economy, maybe 85% of the economy over time. So these regulations create markets, and within those markets, renewable, low carbon, clean fuel producers can sell the fuels, but also sell the greenhouse gas reductions or rights to claim greenhouse gas reductions to the regulated entities. So I want to take a minute and talk about how a protocol for a specific project type gets created. So a project type would be like a digester project or an enteric methane reduction project or an alternative manure management project. And by the time a project of a farm is approached by a developer, there's usually been a lot of work, maybe even several years of work put into developing a project. And so first, whoever is doing that needs to identify an activity that reduces emissions. They need to establish the science to show that those emissions are real. They need to propose a methodology or a protocol to quantify, document, monitor, verify that methodology. That's called a protocol. So they need to propose that to a registry, and a registry is an organization that it's kind of like a cross between a bank and a regulator. So they establish the rules and they make sure everybody's following the rules. The registries also have rules they follow. So in greenhouse gas accounting, just like in financial accounting, there are common fundamental accounting frameworks. So in financial accounting, that would be generally accepted accounting practices. In greenhouse gas accounting, there's an organization called the GHG Protocol, another one, the International Standards Organization, who create these fundamental frameworks that companies, registries, organizations, regulators follow. So if a protocol is approved, then somebody can go out and initiate the project. And then they have to monitor that project, meaning they have to collect data like the number of acres where a certain cropping practice is happening, or the number of cows who are being fed a feed additive, or the volume of biogas produced by a digester. Then whatever data they are collecting has to be verified. So a third-party auditor comes in and reviews all the data and makes sure that everything that's claimed is real and the accounting is accurate. Then somebody has to work through a registry to get the credits certified or get the credits minted so they can actually be put into somebody's account so they can be sold. And across the world, there are thousands of protocols across all different project types. There's forestry projects, renewable energy projects, storing carbon in geological formation to keep it out of the atmosphere. There are industrial gas projects. There's all kinds, and they're typically very specific and have very specific rules. And the same applies to the ones that are relevant to dairy farms. So all of those steps are substantial. And sometimes people ask me, can I go do this really neat and interesting thing? And the answer is, and create carbon credits. And the answer is typically you can, but the question is, how much time and money do you want to spend on it? And how many credits are you going to create to make it worthwhile? So if you have some farms are typically known and renowned for being innovative, and people have lots of innovative ideas. The question is usually, how practical is it to bring that idea to fruition and create credits with an economy of scale? So usually it's the role of a project developer to do this. And Ag Methane Advisors is one project developer, and there's many other project developers out there, and we really shepherd farms through the process of doing this. One thing that is a concept that's essential to consider is the concept of aggregation. So a digester project at a very large dairy may or typically produces enough credits to be an independent project on its own. However, an enteric methane project at a farm with, say, 1,000 cows, there probably wouldn't be enough credits to created for that farm alone to go out and cover the costs of verification, protocol development, project registration, contracting, monitoring, so on and so forth. But maybe if a project developer can aggregate a group of farms, let's say there's 300 farms and many thousands of cows, that all participating in one administrative project together, that can achieve a sufficient economy of scale to make it worthwhile. And it's usually the project developer who bears a lot of the cost and the risks of doing all these activities before the credits get created. Also, project developers often share in some of those costs and risk with the farms or with investment partners. There are entities who want to invest in greenhouse gas reduction projects. And so just like in management of retirement accounts or pension funds, it's really important to have a trusted partner or advisor in the development of these projects. So you want somebody, especially for farms who usually want to focus on producing milk and taking care of their cows and growing crops, they often don't also have the capacity to be following the nuances of what's happening in carbon markets. So they want to make sure they have a trusted partner who is going to help them manage their carbon assets. So if you are going out to evaluate a project developer, you have an opportunity to participate in a project and you're wondering, is this somebody who has approached you? Are they going to be a good partner? So series of pretty straightforward questions here, but what's their history and track record? How long have they been doing it? And just because they're the first one to approach you with this idea doesn't mean they're the only company out there doing it. And then what protocol program standard are they going to use? Did they just come up with some cockamamie idea on their own? Or is this a standard and protocol and program that has already been used to create many credits by many projects and therefore has a good track record? What are they going to need from you? So what data and information will they need from you? What time commitment will they ask you for? Are they going to, there are probably going to be some legal attestations, like a commitment that your farm is in compliance with all environmental and health and safety regulations. What risks are they going to ask you to take on? Are they going to want to disrupt your day-to-day operations with something new and innovative? And what do you think of that? What would that cost you? Another important question is, who will own the reductions? Often these partners or project developers, they're often revenue share agreements. So if they go out and create most of the credits and take on the cost, they keep a portion of the revenue, and a portion of the revenue is passed on to the farms. Sometimes the farms, in doing that, sometimes the farms retain the ownership of the credits until they are sold, and the choice about how to sell and when and what price and so on and so forth is made in collaboration with the project developer. Other times a project developer essentially purchases the rights from the farm and they make all the decisions. And there is not one right or wrong way to do it. Both models work, and there's other series of models in between, but just a question of what feels right to you, the farm, and what's the right business decision to make in this opportunity that's in front of you. Obviously, you need to know the value of the credits, but there's also a lot of questions about how the credits are going to get sold. They can be sold just like other commodities. They can be sold on a spot market. There can be fixed prices. There can be future contracts for payment upon future delivery. Credits can be indexed to market prices. There are futures, and there are not really exchanges to go out and find exactly what the market price is today, typically. So you want to have as much transparency as you can and have a partner who's going to be able to help you obtain that information so you can make informed decisions. In general, you want to make sure the financial compensation structures are obviously well aligned, so you can, trust that partner. And if you have issues, you need to know who to talk to and how to work them out. And you should always be prepared to have a lawyer review any contracts before you sign something. So there is a substantial caution here, which is that once a farm goes to and sells its rights to its emissions reductions, it can't do that twice. You can only sell the rights to your emissions reductions once. And so this, with a digester project, is a typical example, especially since that project type has been around for a long time, and probably more farms are participating in that than any other types of carbon markets. The digester operator or RNG facility operator or electricity producer maybe or likely selling those credits to somebody outside the dairy supply chain. So if you go and sell LCFS credits or RINs or carbon offsets, to one company, you may have an agreement to sell it to them for a long time, 10, 20 years. If a couple years later, the milk co-op comes and says that, oh, we see you have a digester at your farm. We want to buy the credits to use them for our net zero goals. If a farm has already sold those credits, they can't sell them again. That would be double counting, and the credits can't be claimed or retired by two different entities. A milk co-op could potentially make some very careful and thoughtful claims that they're sourcing milk from a farm with a lower greenhouse gas footprint, but they couldn't claim the avoided methane credits or avoided emissions if they've already been sold. So this gets us to another big shift that's happening in carbon markets related for dairy farms and the voluntary carbon markets in general. And really there's this is a top-down shift that's creating a lot of disruption in the market. I think it's generally good. And it's in response to criticism of carbon offsets not having integrity. There are a lot of people who say if an airline goes and buys a carbon offset from somebody who's conserving a forest somewhere, but that airline isn't actually reducing their emissions, then they're just buying their way out of pollution. And there's some validity to that argument, but there's also much more to the story and a lot of nuance. But for a good reason, a lot of lay people have that perspective, and a lot of scientists and experts have shared that perspective as well. So what they are asking, what they're doing is changing a lot of the fundamental standards like the GHG protocol and the ISO standards that I talked about earlier. And they're asking companies to reduce their scope 3 emissions. So if we take Nestle, for example, all of Nestle's direct emissions from their processing plants and all of the vehicles they move, those are scope 1 emissions. All of the emissions associated with the energy that Nestle purchases is their scope 2 emissions. But scope 3 is everything in a company's supply chain. So Nestle knows that 75 or 80%, upwards of 75 or 80% of the greenhouse gas footprint of their milk chocolate comes from the dairy farms. And so, excuse me, misspoke there. Upwards of 75 to 80% of the carbon footprint of the milk that goes into their chocolate comes from the dairy farms. So they know that they need to get the farms to reduce their emissions. They want to provide incentives for farms to reduce their emissions, not just pay somebody else to reduce their emissions. And that way, Nestle is actually reducing emissions in their supply chain. And they are rolling out pilot projects to do this, and other companies are as well. I just keep using Nestle as an example because they're one of the most forward-thinking in this, and I've heard that they're the world's largest buyer of milk. So the dairy industry wants to reduce greenhouse gas emissions so that they can say that the industry as a whole is working to be net zero. And that would be good for milk marketing, and certainly good for the climate. And it may be good for farms, but a lot remains to be seen about how that gets rolled out. So as more programs come out and top-down programs come from co-ops, it will hopefully make it much easier for farms to participate in carbon projects. There may be more aggregated projects. I'm concerned that it may also cause farms to see less of the value from projects. It wouldn't be the first time that farms see a small portion of the value, like they do a small portion of a gallon of milk, for example. And so I hope that in the coming years, we see more incentives from co-ops or milk companies to, and ultimately starting further at the top at the CPG firms, like Nestle, that we see real and meaningful incentives to adopt lower carbon footprint activities instead of seeing mandates, instead of having these activities be an added cost to farms. And there is lots of talk from people in the dairy industry about how the value from carbon markets needs to be shared with farms. And I'm very hopeful and optimistic, but also a little bit skeptical about how that will be rolled out. And but I'm hopeful that that talk will be matched with action. But I think it's really important for farms to be aware of how much value is on the table, and so they can try to negotiate a fair share. So some of the pricing trends in the markets. The voluntary market credits often trade. There's a wide range of project types, but dairy related credits maybe in the $10 to $40 range, but there's not a lot of transparency. As I mentioned before, there's not one exchange to go to. Each project can have a challenge of price discovery. So a lot depends upon what story can be told and how emissions from one project type can be tied to whoever is using those credits. So for example, enteric methane credits may not be as valuable to an airline as they are to a chocolate company. So in some of the compliance markets, the prices can be very different. Like the California Air Resources Board LCFS credits, they currently sell for $60 to $70 a ton. And it's important to mention here that 1 metric ton of CO2 equivalent emissions reductions is equal to 1 carbon credit. So all of these numbers here are equal apples to apples comparisons. But that price a couple years ago was closer to $200 and even above $200 for a little while. And the regulation impacts the rules of the regulation impact supply and demand. And there are rules coming in this market that are expected to bring the price back up. Oregon has a clean fuel standard and its price is currently about $160. There are, the rules of each program can have a substantial impact on the market price, especially in the compliance markets. And just looking at these numbers here, it seems sort of obvious. Well, why wouldn't I go for the $160 market instead of the $10 market? And there are the low carbon fuel standards, clean fuel standards, renewable fuel standards have a lot more complications that go with them. Not just, you don't just have to reduce emissions on your farm, but you have to have a partnership with somebody who is those are fuel standards, and the goal is to reduce emissions of transportation fuel. So if somebody like a farm has a digester and produces renewable natural gas, they have to have a partnership with somebody who is, using that gas for transportation in the relevant jurisdiction, like California or Oregon. In addition, some of the gas cleanup equipment for projects like that is very, very expensive. So I'm gonna go for dairy digester biogas example here, explain a little bit. These are primarily compliance carbon markets. The capital costs are very high, as I said. The economics depend on many things, and largely who puts down the money, who invests, and how much risk do they take on, typically like other markets. For farms, it's always important to define the scope and the boundaries. So where does the digester business begin? Or where does the farm stop and the digester business begin? And then when the manure is coming back to the farm, as it typically does, where does the digester end and the farm restart? And when farms think about participating in digester projects, we think about these two ends of the spectrum. A farm could have very low investment with very low risk. All they do is provide manure and receive a payment stream. On the other end of the spectrum, a farm could design, engineer, permit, finance, build, own, operate a digester RNG project all on their own, way more capital involved, way more responsibility, but they would see much more of the pie, like seeing the passive partner side, you're seeing 5, 7, 10% of the value. If somebody developed everything, owned and operated on their own, maybe they see more like 80, 90% of the value. And people need to choose, with all of those risks, what is right for them. And recently, many dairies are choosing the much closer to the passive partner end of the spectrum and choosing to let somebody who's an expert in digesters and RNG and producing renewable electricity handle that, so that the farm can diversify revenue, get some of the benefits of having a digester on their farm, like bedding and flexibility in manure management, but not have the risk. So if you're going to get started with a digester project, one, there's an economy of scale question. You need to have enough animals to make it worthwhile. Obviously you need the money and you need the people with the knowledge. And then, as I mentioned before, you need to have that way to get the gas to the market to create the credits. So that's often called book and claim accounting. And so there are people who market gas. But for projects that are too small, there are some options. There are centralized digesters. There's hub and spoke models. You could have a lot of manure from several different farms coming to one digester. That has obvious logistics to consider. You could also have multiple digesters all sending gas to one centralized gas upgrading system or injection site. So there's a couple different ways to achieve the necessary economies of scale there. Also, to have enough value from the environmental credits, the farms really have to have an anaerobic baseline. So for farms, for grass-based farms or farms that are where the animals are grazing, or where manure is mostly going into a dry lot, that manure isn't producing a lot of methane in the baseline. And so it's farms where all or the vast majority of manure is going to anaerobic storage, which is most dairies and most large dairies. They have a more advantageous baseline. Their methane emissions to start are higher, so there is more opportunity to reduce methane and more credits to generate. So some questions to consider from the farm perspective. What is your appetite for risk? Do you want to finance this? Do you want to get into another market as volatile as milk? Do you have the human resources? Do you have the experience and expertise? Do you want to operate it? If not, and you want to work with a developer, do they have sufficient expertise and a big enough team to do it and do it right and to respond at 2 o'clock in the morning when a pump breaks? Often we use the analogy with project developer of getting married. Often the contracts are 20 years long, and if you want to get married to that developer, who do you want to get married to, and how is just aside from all the business details and terms, how is the fit with them? Is this an organization you want having staff on your farm every day, year round for the next 20 years? Obviously they have to have the financial wherewithal, but are they going to put constraints on your size of your herd? What if you have to sell a lot of cows and they're not getting enough manure to produce enough gas to meet their return on investment? You have to look in the details of the contracts there, and certainly better to ask those questions early on, long before you're looking at contracts. Are there pretreatment considerations? Often many dairies bed with sand, and sand will trash the components of a digester quickly. And so there might be additional investments that need to be made to separate the sand from the manure. If the digester is down for one reason or another, can you bypass the manure directly to your lagoon? Because you obviously the manure production isn't stopping. And if the developer gets behind schedule, what do you do? How do you work that out with them? So just a couple of slides left here, and just a couple more minutes left. So are you interested in testing? This is the enteric methane example. You might have to try out a new feed additive on a group of your cows to see how they perform. Are you comfortable doing that? And how does that fit into the rest of your milk production? Hopefully, if this opportunity comes to you, it's a choice, not a requirement. And if this comes down the line, who will own and claim the emissions reductions? Is it going to be each farm asked to sell a relatively small credits to get the money back? Or is the project developer or milk co-op going to be selling the credits and passing some revenue on? And is the revenue actually dependent upon carbon market price, or is it a premium on your milk? So, and then how long is the commitment? Is this a pilot project somebody's asking you to try out? Or right off the bat, are they asking you to commit for the next 10, 15, 20 years? With almost all enteric methane projects, aggregation is going to be critical. So what does that mean for your farm to be part of a project with hundreds, perhaps thousands of other farms? And obviously, who's covering the cost of this new feed additive? How does it impact milk production? Are there co-benefits? So these are some of the questions to ask. For regenerative agriculture projects, a lot of similar questions, but some of the specifics here are, will the cropping management practices fit into your operation? But also, will you be asked to add a product like a soil microbe enhancer or biochar or a nitrification inhibitor? Because just the management practices alone, like no-till or cover cropping, are probably not going to produce enough credits per acre to make it worthwhile. And then again here, the aggregation will be critical for project types like this, because the volume of credits per acre is going to be small. So having scale within the larger project of hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions of acres, is probably going to be essential for the project as a whole to be viable. So the last slide here is related to alternative manure management projects. So this is generally getting volatile solids diverted from anaerobic storage to reduce methane emissions. This might be through traditional solid separation, like a screw press separator, but there's also much more advanced ways to do that. And vermicomposting is one where some projects have been quite successful, and it's a really interesting way to do it, while composting with worms at scale. And it's going to function a lot more like a digester project than an enteric methane or regenerative ag project. Probably less likely to be an aggregated project. The capital cost is likely to be much higher. You need to probably build, permit, operate a facility, maintain the equipment, and the economy of scale. How many animals you have, will that make it worthwhile? And the commitments are also likely to be much longer. So thank you very much for your attention. I'm going to stop here and we will take some questions.
Thanks, Patrick. Really appreciate the the information. There's a lot there to chew through. I am going to take just a few minutes, folks, to talk through a very small sliver of data collection that feeds into most of these projects, specifically around choosing a lab partner and how to think strategically about that. I took the liberty of replacing GHG with sustainability in this slide simply because this applies to projects outside of carbon. There's many soil health initiatives going on. There's things that expand outside of carbon for you to consider that will all require lab testing and data management, and that's something AgSource is very excited to partner with you on. So in my very brief list of your thinking strategically checklist, one thing we've done already is determined, how do you think about what program or programs are right for your farm? Patrick did an excellent job talking us through that. What I want to just quickly run through is then understanding, the importance of knowing what tests these programs are going to require. And then after that, how do you choose a good lab partner to help support you there? So let's start by thinking about testing. And here's just 3 quick questions to ask yourself. So much like Sinek would recommend, start with why. So why are you performing this test? Is it required? Is it something you're doing out of your own volition? And if it's required, who is it required by? We see a lot of regulation around nutrient management. That's state run often. But that's important. If you have regulatory testing that you're required to do, that's a high priority. Secondly, what decisions are you going to make based on these test results? So are they going to impact your management decisions? Are they going to impact your bottom line? Feeding right into question 3. How is that going to impact your operation? So we run a lot of tests. We offer a lot of tests. You on your operation do not need to run every test to have impact on your bottom line. So it can get confusing. And the great thing is we have an excellent team here at AgSource ready to help you determine what test is appropriate. So at the end of this slide deck, you'll see some contact information. We would love to get a call, an email, a text from you, and we're happy to help you think through that. When it comes to choosing a lab partner, I obviously think AgSource is a great partner, but I want to be kind of third party in this recommendation because there's scenarios where we won't be your best partner, and that's okay. So as you think about the program you're participating in, what methodology is required? And I'll use soil carbon here as an example simply because this area is well understood, or at least more well understood than some others. So when we think about a method, and you're pulling a soil sample, we have some good understanding around depth, around how we test for carbon, how you have a method that determines how frequently you pull samples and where you pull samples, at what intensity. So those are good things to think through, and obviously can the lab support that methodology? So, and does that transfer across programs that you're qualifying for? Another thing is certification. So does your lab participate in national or statewide certifications? And all that means is we run a lot of samples through our labs. There is a such thing as drift in equipment. Our lab's taking proactive steps to address that. So oftentimes that's a blind sample that gets shared. The lab would test it, send results back, and then we get a grade. And our goal is always to grade as high as possible, obviously, and we do. And that ensures then to you as our customers that your results are accurate and reliable. And then finally, and perhaps the most important piece here, is the level of support that lab can offer you. What level do you need, and is that something that the lab support can match? So just some things to think about as you choose a lab, both in terms of sustainability programs as well as just in general. Let's take just a few seconds to talk about just what we offer here at AgSource. And this is just a very, very brief snip of some of the things we can do for you. I tried to group them to match some of Patrick's talk here, but we have a suite of soil health and carbon testing services. We do offer carbon by combustion, which is the recommended method for many, many carbon programs. As far as agronomic analysis, we have a very, very full suite of traditional fertility for soil, plant testing, water testing, fertilizer analysis. We've been doing that for a long time and have an excellent team that can offer you a very, very high level of support on that front. Manure and compost, of course. And then finally, as many of you probably already know, we are co-op. So we offer milk testing. We also offer diagnostic testing for herd health. And we have a full suite of animal health solutions like tags and gloves and things that can help support you on farm. So, and then of course you see that ... and more, because there's much, much more than I've listed here on these slides. Outside of testing, we have a really great set of services to support that testing. So we have a full suite of nutrient management services. We offer soil sampling. We offer support on precision ag technology for sample collection on the milk front. And then we offer dairy records processing as well. So as you think through these three things, I think we've covered them all in a very brief amount of time. I'd recommend that you use this stair-step approach as you choose a project developer or as you choose who you're going to finance with. Just drill down on each of these categories and really think, what's going to be best for my family, my farm, my future. And don't be afraid to involve a partner like Patrick and his team as you make those decisions. So in closing, I would love to invite you all to participate in a project we're launching. So this is very soil health specific. And these three questions or bits of feedback are what really drove our desire to launch this project this fall. So when we're thinking about benchmarking for soil health, there's a challenge in finding state-specific benchmarking. We get a lot of questions around, hey, I got this report. What does it mean? We have a lot of numbers, but how do I tie that then back to practical management steps? And then finally, we of course care deeply about our members, and we want to help you make economically and environmentally sound decisions. So what does this look like? We are going to spend the fall collecting soil as well as management data on different fields. We're going to focus on the broader Wisconsin area this fall. That's not to say that won't expand. The goal is certainly for it to expand as we learn and we refine the project. So what would you get out of it for participating? We will benchmark soil health in the area, and then we'll also directly tie farm-specific results to management recommendations. So where are you going to get the most bang for your buck? Where's your biggest area of opportunity? To really drill down into those results and help you understand them better. So in closing, would love to just invite you to participate. Feel free to scan that code on the screen. You'll also see some information in the follow-up if you'd like to learn more. Certainly feel free to contact me if you'd like to chat. Would love to talk about opportunities to collaborate. So with that, thank you so much. I'm going to hand it back over to Kate, and she's going to facilitate some of the questions. I think I left us with at least a few minutes to do that. So thank you all very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Kate and Patrick. Patrick, we did have a couple questions come in during your presentation. One of those was, I'm interested in carbon markets, but where do I start? How do I even know what companies I could work with? And what are typical requirements to participate?
Excuse me. So yeah, really big question there. And I would say, reach out to me and we can talk about it. There's so many variables, project types vary widely, and happy to just have a chat with you about some things you're interested in and help give you some direction. So sorry, I can't, there's just can go in so many different directions. Hard to answer all those questions quickly.
Okay, not a problem. That being said, we will be sharing contact information for Patrick in our follow-up email. So if you do want to get a hold of him, we will have that in there for you. Another question that came in, Patrick, is you mentioned credits being worth more in different areas. Is there any geographical limitations to where I can sell my credits?
There are, and like a lot of the things, it depends. There are so many different programs and markets. So, and the buyers of the credits sometimes have preferences. So in the regulated carbon markets, like take a digester project, for example, a digester anywhere in the US at the moment can sell into California's carbon market, but there is a subset of buyers, the regulated entities in that market. To take a voluntary market example, there are companies all over the world that are interested in buying credits, but more and more in the voluntary market, companies want to buy credits from projects that they have a connection to. So I expect to see more and more links between, for dairies, between the farms and who they sell their milk to, and who the end users of that milk are. So even if you sell to, let's just take DFA as a co-op, where your milk goes with within DFA and determine, and who DFA turns around and sells it on to, determines whose supply chain you'll be in, and that's gonna have an impact on who wants to buy the credits.
Kate, we did have a question come in for you. If I do not currently use AgSource, can I still use the lab testing?
Oh, for sure. We would love to work with you.
As you can see on the screen, we have our contact information on our website. There is also on our website, you can request sampling supplies to take your samples, and we have labs all across the Midwest, but we take in samples from all around the world. So please don't hesitate to reach out to us for any specific questions regarding lab testing information you have. That was all the questions we had come in. We appreciate everyone's time today. And like I said, we will be sending out a follow-up email with this recording, because I know there was a lot of content presented and a lot to absorb. So we understand wanting to kind of refresh yourselves from it. If you do have any questions, please feel free to contact AgSource or Patrick with Ag Methane with any of those follow-up questions. We appreciate everyone's time today, and we hope you have a wonderful day.